Hello, and welcome to another edition of What You Need to Know, a Canadian Polycast. I'm Alison Fair, a consultant here at Blue Sky Strategy Group, and I am joined once again by my colleagues, Neil Brody, Jeff Turner, and Cam Holstrom. Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello.
And so we have in Ontario another 4 years of Doug Ford. What I want to talk about in this, Neil's a happy camper. What I want to talk about in this podcast is conservative in Canada. And the reason being is that we've had this majority, second straight majority won by Mr. Ford. We've also seen Jason Kenney fall apart in Alberta. And then we're seeing this federal conservative campaign and what's happening there. There's a lot going on from many levels for those who are watching. So what I wanted to bring to our clients and those who are joining us is to understand what is going on and how it's going to affect them over the next, in the case of Ontario, 4 years, Alberta as it develops, and the federal conservatism as it garners a new leader. So Neil, I'm going to start with you. You're our blue and blue sky here. Let's start with the Ontario election. What does 4 more years of Doug Ford mean for Conservatives, Ontario, and Canada as a whole?
Well, I would say right off the top that conservatism has never been stronger in Canada, I don't think. It's a fantastic morale boost for Conservatives in Canada to see Doug Ford come back. If I remember correctly, he's picked up 16 more seats in this election. He ran on a campaign of getting things done. Whether you like it or not, hospital got built, highways are going to get built, helping the average Ontario resident keep working and growing the economy, and those messages resonated with voters. I know there's a low vote turnout, but I would put that mostly at the feet of the opposition parties, that they didn't get their vote out because both of them lost seats. That is the NDP and the Liberal Party. But the people who did come out to vote were excited about the Doug Ford platform.
Okay, so what does this mean then for, briefly, what does this mean for Ontarians, those who work in Ontario, and those who have to deal with Ontario when we talk about the federal government and the other provinces as a federation? What can we expect?
Well, the last 4 years of the Ford government, a little over 2 of which 2 years were taken over by the COVID-19 pandemic. I think Mr. Ford proved himself an able operator at the highest political levels. He extolled the virtues of Chrystia Freeland for most of the pandemic. He found her easy to deal with. He was quite complimentary to her, but then again held the Prime Minister's feet to the fire when he thought that something wasn't necessarily the best for Ontario. So I think he's proven himself a capable operator in the political circles of Canada, and I foresee nothing to change there than 4 more years of Doug Ford working with all levels of government to get progress in Ontario.
Okay, do you see that happening, Jeff, with this new Ford majority?
I have an interesting. I'm kind of 2 minds on it. So I agree entirely with Neil. I mean, the ongoing good relations, if I can put it that way, between the Trudeau government, including Minister Freeland, and Doug Ford specifically, and to a lesser extent, I think the rest of his government, but they all are on the same page that way. Mm-hmm. Where I find that I'm of 2 minds is I think that will certainly continue to produce results, like the big announcements, to battery manufacturing and steel mills and all the good things in Ontario that the 2 levels of government should be working on together and can now, where they weren't able to do it. Just 4 years ago, they weren't able to agree on much, and now they can on the good things for both of them. But on the other hand, I also see Doug Ford now, and to Neil's point, is the most successful Conservative leader in Canada. I also see Doug Ford now sitting as at the head of the table of premiers. Whether or not he's the actual chair of the Council of the Federation doesn't matter. He is the most politically important first minister at that table. And I'm curious to what extent other premiers, I mean, we saw, so let me back it up for a second. Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan was a very well-noticed guest at Doug Ford's victory party and was around slapping everybody in the back and smiling. And not just because they're ideological friends, even though I would say Mr. Moe is far more ideological in the Jason Kenney school than Ford is. Hopefully he's learning some things from Doug Ford. But also I think there's a lot of people lining up behind Premier Ford to be the voice of the provinces. And why do I go on here? There's some really big things coming down the pipeline in the intergovernmental conversation. Healthcare funding, chief among that. We know how Conservatives and Liberals often line up on how a healthcare system should be structured and funded. And so those are big, challenging conversations. So I'll be curious how Premier Ford is able to navigate that friendly relationship while I think also being asked to and cajoled into being perhaps the pointy end of the Premier's spear on some of these really difficult and expensive options for the federal provincial negotiation dynamic.
Okay. Cam, to you, what do you see the next 4 years for the province of Ontario under Doug Ford?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. To me, it comes down to what is the message that he takes from the result last night. I'll just point out Neil's number, just a little off. They gained 7 new seats because you have to remember last time he lost about a 10 or so incumbents to having removed from caucus or whatnot and all of that, right? He was very much on the same track as Jason Kenney was for a while when it came to caucus management and those kind of issues, even though he did correct course. But to me, if the message that he takes out of this is that he's won a grand sweeping majority and has a huge mandate to go off and do all these things, I think that's the wrong one, because in the end, he won more seats with 500,000 fewer votes. You know, yes, everyone had issues getting the vote out yesterday, but so did Doug Ford. Again, 500,000 votes is nothing to sneeze at for not turning out. And I think he could very easily slip back into pre-pandemic Doug Ford situation where he moves too fast, too hard, and ends up creating controversy. To me, when I'm looking at Premier Ford in this coming term, I'm looking at it in terms of legacy, because, and I'm not going to make a prediction on this, but if you told me that in 2026, Doug Ford decided, I'm done, my work is done here, I'm handing it over to the next guy instead of running for a third term, it wouldn't shock me at all, because I don't think he's the kind of person who necessarily needs to have that in his life. So
Neil's agreeing, yeah.
Yeah, to me, this is legacy time, right? Now you've got that second term. What's going to be your legacy coming out of this? And I think that might say a lot about the direction in which he tries to go going forward. When it comes to his place in Canadian conservatism, you know what, he does make a very interesting contrast to what's happening out there, and I think that it could serve as a lesson for others. But at the same time, what I find interesting here is that, especially for the race we're seeing federally right now, you're seeing some who are going harder right, who are chasing the anti-vaccine crowd and anti-public health crowd and all that. You'll know because we had a proliferation of these parties running in Ontario between Derek Sloan and Randy Hillier's group and others. None of them did that well. You know, I think Derek Sloan might have been the best, getting 7.5% of the vote in his own riding. I found interesting in Randy Hillier's old riding where he didn't run, his daughter ran and she got 0.1% of the vote. Okay. So you tell me how all of a sudden where Doug Ford, he lost that vote, yet at the same time, he lost 500,000 votes, yet he was still better off in the end. There might be a lesson there for the federal Conservatives instead of chasing that tail and thinking instead, how do you work this coalition from the other side?
Jeff, yeah, maybe
if I can pick up and then we'll send it back to Neil, I suppose, because I want to pick up on something both of them are saying. Number one, I definitely agree with Cam. I think there was actually 800,000 fewer votes than 2018 for the guy who got a bigger majority, but that's a victim of low turnout. But here's where I want to think the way Cam does as a Liberal, especially because it is a very weird election that way, and those things, they do matter. But I'll actually agree also with Neil a little bit as well, which is, for those that did come out to vote, they voted for him overwhelmingly, obviously. For those who didn't come out, I think there's still a metric. As much as I want those people to come out, and I really lament that our democracy is currently that weak that 60% of people are not really turning out to participate. But it's an inherent vote of confidence, right? Those people had no reason to be frightened away or to be motivated to go and protect theirs and what they have and what their families have. And so I bring it all the way back to the Conservative leadership race federally, and that that division, that's my word, the division between the far right and the center right. And what Doug Ford proved is in the absence of somebody who is seen as hard right, or who said, talking about cuts or smashing things or being the bull in the china shop or vaccine mandates or all the kind of stuff out there, by not going there and not being there anymore, it gave permission to that 60%, unfortunately, to not worry too much about letting other people make the decision for them. And I think that's the lesson for federal Conservatives. My favorite example, sorry, last thing I'll say, Doug Ford was asked about his plan for climate change, a plan he doesn't have, like patently nothing about climate change anywhere. Right. And his answer literally was to say, it wasn't his answer, his written form, which is even more incredulous, was, I want to make traffic better so that nobody has to choke on fumes while waiting in traffic to get home. That was his answer on climate change in 2022. But again, didn't scare anybody. Oh, Doug and his highways, gosh. Whereas, what would Poilievre be saying, right? Like, we need to burn oil all the way down Wellington Street until the clouds are so thick with black smoke, those progressives bump into things in front of them. Like, that's what we hear from the federal Conservative Party. So, like, the lesson to them is like, guys, you can still be against something. You just shouldn't be so bloody in your face about it all the time in a way that turns so many people off.
All right. So, Neil, going back to both what Cam and Jeff have said, we've got tonight the Friday deadline to get the membership for Conservatives who want to vote in the leadership race. And so what does the federal Conservatives need to take away from the success of Doug Ford and Jason Kenney's failure in Alberta to make a difference when it comes to choosing a leader?
Well, first off, it's always nice as the sole Conservative on this panel to have such support for a Conservative government from my NDP and Liberal colleagues.
Something got lost in translation there.
Listen, what can be taken away federally? During the provincial campaign, and even before the provincial campaign, back in April and March, it was noticed by people in the media and members of the opposition that Doug Ford wasn't out much talking about much. And when Doug Ford did go out and talk about stuff, he talked about the stuff he wanted to talk about. He didn't get sidetracked into what the opposition usually likes to trap Conservatives in, and we all know what that is. And I'm not going to say it because I don't want to get trapped into talking about it. But if the candidates for the federal Conservative leadership can stay on their message, and all of them have a different message to give, if they can stay on their message and stay away from talking about what other people want to talk about, that only helps conservatism. Conservatism, smaller government, more personal choice, less large government programs, more reliance on your neighbors and your own hard work. I think that helps conservatives win elections. I know there's no permanent leader right now, but the last credible federal poll I saw had the Conservatives in front of the Liberals. Now I know there's no leader there, so it's easy for people to say, "Oh, I'd vote Conservative" when you don't have a defining leader. But conservatism, like I said, this is a good time to be a conservative because things are looking up. There'll be a good leadership campaign, a good hard-fought leadership campaign in Alberta. There'll be a good hard-fought leadership campaign in federally, and the numbers look good across the country for Conservative support.
All right. Well, let's just hope we don't go too far right in conservatism here in this country, because I'd hate to see, I know from my opinion, I'd hate to see what was happening down the States translate here in
Well,
Canada.
let's just be honest that conservatism in Canada is nowhere near as crazy as conservatism in the States. I know that that's a fantastic axe to grind in a partisan discussion, but that sort of stuff, that sort of stuff is not front and center here in Canada.
And quickly, Cam, before we wrap.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the interesting thing about what we saw with Premier Ford and what we'll see, especially after we get a better idea of the membership numbers, where some of these new members are coming from, might be the idea that just as with liberalism, just as with New Democrats, you know what, there isn't a homogeneous liberal, New Democrat, or conservatives in this country. There is that regional effect. And to me, it'll be very curious to see what the leadership, when the membership numbers come out, and how that translates. Because maybe part of the lesson that we should take from this is that maybe what's successful as a conservative in Ontario and the GTA may not be successful in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And if that's the case, is there a future for a united party that tries to try to cross those two divides? I think it's going to be an interesting conversation to come forward, because I think that's something that's coming up in this federal race. But to me, I think that's very interesting for this, is because when you're seeing the conversation in the federal race versus what's happened in Alberta versus what's happened in Ontario, they are very different conversations, and it's kind of hard to figure out how do you have all of that in the same tent and keep it all together.
Well, and they're having various conversations within that leadership race as well. So it will be interesting to see how conservatism across the country comes to fruition here in the next few months in Canada. So Neil, Jeff, and Cam, thank you so much for discussing this with me today. And thank you to the viewers for watching. I hope you'll join us next time. Take care.
Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Blue Sky Strategy Group is one of Canada's leading public affairs firms. For government relations, lobbying, and strategic communications advice across Canada, visit us at blueskystrategygroup.com. Blue Sky Strategy Group is a proud member of the Global Communications Alliance.